Hello everyone, and welcome to the first micro-lecture of the semester. In this first set of mini lectures, we're going to begin discussing what exactly drugs are and their importance in society today. As you're probably aware, drug use in this country has been pretty constant in both a historical and modern sense. Humans have always looked for ways to cure illnesses and treat their pain, whether that pain is physical or mental in nature. Because of this, there has been a huge market for the production of drugs, and there's a lot of money involved in both regulated and black markets. Throughout the semester, we're going to be focusing on many hot button topics as we discuss legalization of certain drugs and a push to decriminalize others. However, it is important to note that although we will focus on many illegal drugs, not everything we will discuss will be considered harmful in terms of the general context of drug use. There is a wide breadth of uses and associated stereotypes or stigmas with many of these, but we will discuss what that really means in the broader context of the drug industry, big pharma, and illegal markets as well. We know that everyone uses drugs in some capacity. You get sick, you go to the doctor, you get an antibiotic to cure your earache. You've had a hard day at work and you go home and have a drink. You get in a car accident and doctors put you on morphine to help with pain management while you're at the hospital. There are different degrees and uses for drug use. It is important to note that no one is immune to drug abuse. Drug use is an equal opportunity affliction. Drug users are found in all occupations and professions, at all income and social class levels, and in all age groups. Even though we all use drugs, there are different avenues for drug use based on income. For example, if you're poor and you want to drink, you might have to discriminate a little less against the type of alcohol you want to drink. However, if you're rich, you can choose to drink only that 40-year-old scotch. But it also extends to illegal drugs as well. For example, if you are a low-income cocaine user, you might have to purchase crack rather than powder cocaine. But the bottom line is that drug use and drug abuse does not discriminate. Rich, poor, young, old, black, white, male, female, it doesn't matter. At some point in time, we will all use drugs, but how we react and come to depend on them are different experiences for everyone. At some point in our lives, we all identify as drug users, whether they are in the legal or illegal sense. But how and why we use drugs might vary based on the individual. Our responses to those drugs are based on a few different factors. First, we have biological, genetic, and pharmacological factors. Substance abuse and addiction involve biological and genetic factors. The pharmacology of drug use focuses on how the ingredients of a particular drug affect the body and the nervous system, and in turn, a person's experience with a particular drug. For instance, certain drugs give you a high faster than others. The way that you take the drug will have a different effect on your body. Do you have any allergic reactions to the drug? For instance, I could never become addicted to Vicodin because it causes a very strong allergic reaction in me. I learned that the hard way after I had my wisdom teeth taken out years ago. There are also cultural factors to consider. How do societal views, determined by culture and tradition, affect our initial approach to and use of a drug? For Native Americans, smoking and drinking peyote is an action of cultural significance. If you travel to Europe, there is a more lax attitude toward drinking alcohol compared to here in the United States. The legal drinking age is lower than 21, and wine is commonly consumed with lunch and dinner daily. In terms of social factors, what are the specific reasons why a drug is taken? Are you drinking for fun or socially? Are you drinking because you're depressed? Are you drinking because your home life is rough and you're self-medicating? Are you taking the pills because the doctor prescribed them to you? Or are you taking them because you're addicted to pain pills at this point? There are more socially acceptable reasons for drug use and the drugs that are being used. Drinking at a bar on a Friday night is more acceptable than drinking at a bar at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday, for example. In terms of contextual factors, We're looking at how the physical surroundings, whether we're at a music concert, a bar, nightclubs, a fraternity or sorority party, how does that setting affect the amount of drug use? Do you drink at concerts or at happy hour with your friends at a house party? Do you smoke pot only when someone buys it and brings it to a gathering? These environments also have an effect on how the drugs might make you feel. Later in the semester, we're going to talk about situational factors and how you might feel drunker at the party after four beers than you would at home drinking those same 4 beers. The music, the party atmosphere, and the social acceptability all have a role in how our bodies respond to the situation. So which one means the most? Which is the most impactful? That depends, doesn't it? We'll spend the entire semester trying to answer this question and apply it to different types of drugs and situations. But before we answer that question, we need to spend a little more time trying to define and identify what drugs really are. So what do we mean by a drug? This means literally anything that modifies or distorts our bodies and our minds. So what does it mean to distort or modify? It means that it changes it in some way. So how does the drug Lipitor change your body? It lowers your cholesterol. What about NyQuil? It helps to calm your cough and helps you to sleep so that you can get better when you have a cold. NyQuil is very mild, but there are stronger cough medicines out there that you might need a prescription for. There are some cough medicines with codeine in them. Of course, this does the same thing that NyQuil does, but on a much stronger level. And if you want to take it further, you can even mix your codeine cough syrup with other things and come up with items like purple drink, scissor, or lean, promethazine with codeine, and a clear beverage such as Sprite or gin. If you're feeling fancy, you can even throw a Jolly Rancher in and let it dissolve. We know that Lil Wayne is often accredited with this concoction, but he probably isn't taking this for his cough. Drinking this will slow his body movements. It might cause hallucinations, drowsiness, and sleepiness. On the flip side, taking this has actually caused Lil Wayne to have seizures quite a bit. That's the downside to the psychoactive high for him. So what are psychoactive drugs? Anything that alters your nervous system and your brain patterns. It changes your perceptions of what is going on around you. If you remember a few years back, after taking bath salts, that drug caused a guy to eat the face of another man down in Miami. The Miami Cannibal attack occurred on May 26, 2012, when Rudy Eugene assaulted Ronald Popo, a homeless man on the MacArthur Causeway in Miami, Florida. During the 18-minute encounter, which was filmed, Eugene had stripped himself nude and accused Popo of stealing his Bible, beat him unconscious, and then removed Popo's pants and a bit off most of his face, including the beard, his left eye, and left him blind in both eyes. The attack ended when Eugene was fatally shot by a Miami police officer. You can imagine the way that the bath salts altered Eugene's system was an instrumental factor in causing him to eat another man's face off. Psychoactive drugs fall into both licit and illicit categories. Licit drugs are considered legal and for the most part socially acceptable. Every morning I partake in licit psychoactive drug use as I drink my coffee. Other examples like this include tea, alcohol, and tobacco, both if you're over 21, and other over-the-counter drugs. Illicit drugs are illegal, but depending on who you talk to, could also be socially acceptable. Pot, for instance, is becoming the poster child for socially acceptable illicit drug use. But in some states, it's now licit drug use. So it depends on the circumstances. So far, no one has classified LSD or heroin as a licit drug, as they typically aren't perceived to have any sort of medicinal value. Even though some drugs are more socially acceptable than others, we do see that more people die annually due to licit drug use rather than illicit. Alcohol and tobacco products kill more people per year than all other illicit drugs combined. which is part of the argument for marijuana legalization since it is so difficult to overdose on marijuana. You have to really, really try hard to do it, and even then, there are no documented cases of overdose from marijuana on its own. You would get so sick that your body would purge the weed from your system first. But counter to that argument about marijuana is the gateway hypothesis. Gateway drugs are considered those that we think will lead to harder drug use. They are types of commonly used drugs that are believed to lead to the use of more powerful, mind-altering, and addictive drugs, such as hallucinogens, cocaine, crack, and heroin. If I drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes, the concern is that I will start using pot next. Once I'm done using pot, or it's maybe not as effective as it used to be, then I'll start snorting coke or shooting up heroin. Something smaller and less dangerous leads to the use of bigger, harder drugs. But how much validity is there to the gateway hypothesis? Do these smaller drugs lead to bigger or harder drug use? No. The only thing that pot leads to is an increased appetite and maybe some bigger pants. But there is no credible scientific evidence that marijuana use leads to harder drug use. The overwhelming body of medical and scientific research does not lend any credibility to the gateway hypothesis, which was one of the center points of drug prevention programs such as DARE. The biggest gateway drug that we need to be concerned about are the prescription painkillers and how those have led us to the current opioid crisis we find ourselves in, something we will discuss later this semester. This concludes the first micro-lecture for this module. In the next micro-lecture, we're going to begin exploring the different types of drug use, an initial discussion about abuse and addiction. So join me next time while for our short discussion on these topics. Okay, so that's where the first ends.
Okay. You're good with that? You're ready to move on?
Yes, I'm fine. Okay. No, we'll keep going.
All right, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Welcome back to our next micro-lecture for this module. Today we're going to be discussing the different types of drug use that are available to us, potential behaviors associated with abuse and full-blown addiction, and we will end our discussion with the most common demographic features of drug users in the United States today. In other words, we'll discuss who our drug users are. Drug abuse is known as chemical or substance abuse and is the willful misuse of either licit or illicit drugs for the purpose of recreation, perceived necessity, or convenience. Drug abuse can occur no matter what you're using. Clearly, our friend here is pretending to mainline illicit substance, but if he's trying to consume that much coffee, then he's being a little bit abusive of the world's best drink. So overall, what do we mean by drug abuse? It means that you're using the substance too much, too often, and in too great a dose to be considered normal or recommended. This is for recreational purposes, or it's necessary because your body needs the drug to stay even. Drug abuse also refers to a more intense misuse of drugs, often to the point of addiction. This is known as chemical or substance abuse. So you're misusing the drug so much that you have now created a psychological and physical dependence on the drug. If at any point you start to go into withdrawal from the substance, that's okay. Maybe start from drug abuse?
Yeah, it's the second or third paragraph?
The third one.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So just from the beginning of that paragraph?
Yeah.
Okay. Drug abuse also refers to a more intense misuse of drugs, often to the point of addiction. This is known as chemical or substance abuse. So you're misusing the drug so much that you have now created a psychological and physical dependence on the drug. If at any point you start to go into withdrawal from that substance, then you are in the addiction range. For example, that you know that if you are a consistent coffee drinker, there is a low level of dependence that can be created. You know how you feel on days when you can't get a cup of coffee. For me, skipping a day of coffee often results in a headache, and sometimes I can get a little shaky. A quick cup of coffee and that feeling goes away. Can you imagine how much worse it gets when you can't get your regular dose of oxy or heroin? The withdrawal symptoms are much worse and without assistance can kill you depending on what you're withdrawing from. As we have discussed, there are many different types of legal and illegal drugs. There are also different ways in which we can use them for either their intended purpose or for more recreational means. There are 4 different ways in which we can classify drug use. The first is legal instrumental use, meaning that you're taking the prescribed drug or the over-the-counter drug to relieve or treat mental or physical symptoms. You're taking the drug correctly to treat the correct illness. You're taking cough medicine to treat your cough. You have a headache and you take Tylenol. You only treat it when you need it, and you only take it for the thing that it is supposed to treat. The next is legal recreational use, meaning that you're using illicit drugs like tobacco, alcohol, and caffeine to achieve a certain mental state. The drug itself is legal, but doesn't really have a prescribed medical use. You're taking it because you enjoy the taste of alcohol or you're trying to get drunk. You're drinking the coffee because you're not coherent until you have at least 2 cups. But here you're just taking the drug because it's an enjoyable experience for you. You can still become addicted to these drugs and develop a dependency, but they're legal compared to other types of drugs that fall into the illegal recreational use category. Next up, we have illegal instrumental use, which means you are taking non-prescribed drugs to achieve a task or a goal. This is the flip side of what we were talking about before. You're no longer using the NyQuil to calm your cough. You're using it as a sleep aid. This has actually happened so often that the makers of NyQuil created a separate medicine called ZQuil, so we would stop chugging NyQuil all the time. Your goal is different than the intended use of the drug. So Sudafed is a fantastic example. It is used to break up the congestion and sinus pressure that we all have when we're sick. But what else does Sudafed help us do? It's an ingredient to help cook methamphetamine. That's why you need to provide the pharmacy with your driver's license if you're purchasing the extra strength Sudafed, Sudafed D. Finally, we have illegal recreational use, which means you're taking illicit drugs for fun or pleasure. The former governor of California is smoking pot because he likes to get high. I might be using Molly or MDMA ecstasy because I want to feel the feelings of euphoria and inner peace that come with the hallucinations. This is the category that we are most worried about because recreation can often turn into something larger. When you have all of these people taking drugs for a variety of different reasons, you're creating a high demand market that both companies and dealers have taken advantage of. We are spending so much money every year on the consumption of licit and illicit drugs. For example, the average American spends roughly $579 per year on alcohol alone, according to statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is just for social drinkers alone. For heavy drinkers who average roughly 14 drinks or more per week, the CDC estimates that these individuals spend upwards of $5,000 per year, depending on which market they reside. In 2022, the marijuana industry set a record high with Americans spending more than $30 billion on legal marijuana. As a comparison, the country only spent $20 billion on chocolate the same year. Collectively, the U.S. spends roughly $387 billion on prescription drugs per year, according to data from 2021. This accounts for the 70% of Americans who are on at least one prescription drug. And we're prescribed things now that never existed for our parents and grandparents. A lot of the drugs that we take now didn't even exist 30 plus years ago. We have had a large boom of pills be released in the last 3 decades. Some of the most popular have actually been created by accident. For example, Viagra It was originally a heart medication and then had this tiny little side effect in men, and it was rather beneficial in that regard in comparison to the heart treatment. But the funny thing is, if you want to use Viagra and you have a heart condition, then you're going to need to take something else before you can use the Viagra. This was a miracle pill to men everywhere, but it was the pill of the century for Pfizer. Overall, what does this tell us? From this data, we clearly like to drink and smoke and keep ourselves alive with prescription drugs, and we will gladly spend a lot of money to do so. These are mega industries that we're talking about, and it's only the tip of the iceberg. This doesn't even take into account illegal markets and the money that we spend there. So let's talk about who is using what for a moment. Across the country, alcohol and tobacco use remains a strong priority for Americans. Let's focus instead on the other substances. In 2021, more than 52 million people reported that they used marijuana within that year. More than half of Americans reported using weed at least once in their lifetime. When you break that down further into legal states and regular smokers, more than 30% of the Washington, D.C. area residents report using routinely. This is an interesting statistic, specifically because you can legally use and possess marijuana in D.C., but you cannot purchase it legally. In comparison to much harder substances like cocaine, only 4.8 million, or about 1.7% of Americans used cocaine in 2021. This is a significantly smaller percentage compared to marijuana use. In 2017, the CDC reports that there were more than 58 prescriptions written for every 100 Americans. That means more than 17% of Americans had at least one opioid prescription filled, with an average of 3.4 opioid prescriptions dispensed per patient. While this seems like a lot, and it is, there have been significant efforts made to stop the drastic overprescription methods that doctors had been prescribing for years. The National Institute of Health, or NIH, finds that for most age groups, men have higher rates of use or dependence on illicit drugs and alcohol compared to women. However, women are just as likely as men to develop a substance use disorder. Research also suggests that women often use drugs differently, respond to drugs differently, and can have unique obstacles to effective treatment as simple as not being able to find childcare or being prescribed treatment that has not been adequately tested on women. There are often different responses to the drugs as well based on use. For example, women are much more likely to lose spatial awareness compared to men when using marijuana. Men also seem to achieve a stronger high than most women. When using cocaine, women may become more sensitive than men to the cocaine's effects on the heart and blood vessels. In contrast, female and male cocaine users show similar deficits in learning, concentration, and academic achievement, even if the women had been using it for longer. Female cocaine users are also less likely than male users to exhibit abnormalities of blood flow in the brain's frontal regions. These findings suggest a sex-related mechanism that may protect women from some of the detrimental effects of cocaine use on the brain. In addition to gender, there are some other rates of drug use to discuss. In terms of education, only 5.4% of Americans with a college degree reported consistent illicit drug use in the last year. High school graduates reported an 11.1 use rate during that same time. These low use rates are pretty routine, with the trend indicating that the more education you receive, the less likely you are to report drug use. What are some reasons for that? There might be more to lose for some individuals. Higher levels of education are normally correlated with stronger levels of employment. Do you want to lose your job? Probably not. The one thing that is actually positively correlated with levels of education is binge drinking. Binge drinking is pretty popular among college students, especially on the weekends, but that is still illicit substance use. Unemployed individuals report higher drug use than those who are full-time employees. What are some reasons for that? Why might they be unemployed? Is it because of the drugs? Is it because of criminal records? If I am unemployed, do I care as much about using? Some individuals who are unemployed might be temporarily unemployed and are in search of other jobs, so they still won't use. But those that are chronically unemployed might not care as much about using. What else do they have to lose? For those who are involved with the criminal justice system, we see that roughly 1/3 of state and 1/4 of federal prisoners were under the influence while they did commit their crime. This does not necessarily mean that they committed a drug crime, simply that they were under the influence of something when they committed their crime. They certainly could have been charged with a drug crime as well if they were in possession of an illegal substance at the time of their arrest. Or at the very least, they could have had a public intoxication charge thrown at them. So these individuals are arrested one day. They're going to be released into the community, a lot of them still under probation or parole supervision. In terms of those on community supervision, roughly 20% of state offenders will violate the terms of their supervision for a drug violation. In comparison, over 50% of federal offenders will violate the terms of their supervision for the same violation. Violations for conditional release are quite frequent with offenders. This could be testing dirty, this could be a new drug crime, or this could be something else that violated their release conditions. Why do you think that federal prisoners violate more often? One reason might be due to the larger amount of drug crimes prosecuted by the federal government. There is simply a higher number of those individuals being arrested for drug offenses than there are at the state level. This concludes our second micro-lecture for the module. In the final micro-lecture this week, we're going to wind things down by dissecting drug use in the workplace, drug testing, welfare programs, and how this influences drug treatment programs and policies. Join me next time for our short discussion on these topics.